conservation, not energy production. If it's heavy metals in your diet or in your air or in your environment that are finding their way into your body, again, the mitochondria respond in that fashion. And it can also be trauma. Any psychic trauma that you've had, and most of us have had some psychic trauma. And that, to the extent that we're still, that's unresolved, then that can lead to the mitochondrial gear shifting toward conservation. So this is a very significant step, I think, in science, health sciences, though it's certainly not widely being discussed yet, but it will be, because it's kind of a revolutionary step to think of the, so many people. I mean, I would have asked you, we didn't launch into this so quickly, I was going to ask if who's had trouble in your life with not enough energy or feeling fatigued or chronic fatigue or whatever, raise your hand. Yeah, so most of us have had periods where we felt like, oh, I'm just dragging, what's the matter? And now we know that, well, it can be a lot of different things, but we know how that works, at least one aspect of how that works, which is that because the mitochondria are responding with energy. I mean, they create the ATP, which is the medium of energy in the body. And that's what their job is. And you see a little backstory, for those of you who don't know, most of you may know, about the mitochondria, is that they are really immigrants who found their way into the body. They are not the same as the rest of our body. They have their own DNA. They are not run by our DNA. And they were bacteria. They were bacteria who migrated into the body and settled. And they are passed down from your mother. They don't come through the father. The father, at the time of conception, dumps his mitochondria in favor of the mother's. So the mitochondria that you have in your body, which are former bacteria that are residing, actually come through the matrilineal lineage, not from both parents. So, so this brings up all kinds of interesting thoughts about the feminine, and each of the feminine in each of us, whether we're male or female, is the, we say in Tantra, that's Shakti, that's the power. Well, the mitochondria are exactly what give us our energy and our power and our vitality. So here we are kind of, understanding more about the intermarriage through medical science, which is doesn't often happen, unfortunately. But this is a clear example. And so I was reading about this work, and then I was opened the New York Times, and there was this whole thing about the Me Too process, the Me Too movement in Europe and in France, where it was poo-pooed and pushed down, and now it's erupting much more flagrantly, and people are taking action, and very famous people are being taken to task for their abuse of women, of the feminine. And so, the mitochondria have that nature that if they are the power, but at the same time, if there's abuse happening, that can pull them in, so they're not using their power the way that they could. So, this is running through all dimensions and levels of, of ourselves and society and the world and contemporary events, and it's fascinating. So that's just a taste of what this is all about, and it's intricate. It means that violence done to us and the effects of that directly affect the mitochondria, who then, quote, make a decision, but who then respond by pulling in the stops, not producing as much energy. Not spanda is shocked and withdraws, and that doesn't mean that the power isn't there. So this is an odd thing we're trying to deal with in society about women and men and the feminine and the masculine, and if the women are so powerful, why are they responding this way to abuse? Because that's nature. Nature itself is the power which sustains us, and yet we are abusing it, and of course it's being damaged, so it can't give us the nurturings that we would expect. And the same thing happens on all these different levels, that if you abuse the feminine, then its power is pulled back and can't help you. And that happens inside of each of us, because we are abusing ourselves through the contaminations and the environment that we take in and don't clean out. And we're abusing ourselves by things that cause inflammation in the body, that then our vitality is withdrawn. It shrinks back, and yet that's what we rely on. So you can read it in all these different levels and contexts, but I would venture to say that it's the theme of our time, and one that's extremely deep and central to our well-being. How does that grab you? I'm just blown away. I just think, well, wow, this is amazing. Yes, Arbella.
So Rudyji, if I heard you correctly, it sounds as though there are certain triggers, usually perhaps having to do with either psychological or physiological trauma, that the mitochondria responds to by shutting down.
Yeah.
Or slowing down, perhaps.
Slowing down, yeah.
Slowing down.
And so it goes into a kind of reserve mode.
Right.
Like pulling back, holding back, like, well, wait a minute, this is not the time to be expansive and outspoken. And so, when I say these words, I think on so many different levels within us and socially and everywhere. But so what we're we might say, well, don't be shy, just step forward. But we are, who are we to say that? We're looking now at the very essence of where that spontaneity comes from physiologically, and that's how it functions. So we can't say, no, you shouldn't function that way. We should respect and how it functions and say, what can we do to support you so that you can give us vitality? And so this is the same message to the people who are saying, you know, the feminists of the day, which is a different thing from what feminists used to be. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a follow-up to that, and that is when I was at Panchakarma, not last time, it must have been in 2016, I was given a specific treatment to that Krishnaji, the Vaida, informed me would repair the cells of the mitochondria, and or the cell walls of the mitochondria is how he describes it. And I have felt, and this process has been ongoing. I had it the last time I was there as well, so I've had it twice now. I have felt energized, and of course I'm taking the Smriti on a regular basis every day, which is also for the mitochondrial health. But I wonder if there are accessible triggers to encourage the mitochondria to come back and do its job, or is it dependent upon healing of the wound?
Well, that's a good question, and I think it we're learning. You know, we're trying to puzzle this out. These are the questions, but I think from what I can understand, a lot of it is we have to cease and desist the abuse, and because that's what does it. You know, when we push ourselves too hard, or when we overdo things, or we eat things that are damaging, and that creates inflammation, and that's what the mitochondria respond to. All these things that we are either consciously or unconsciously doing that are damaging to ourselves. You know, sometimes I have thought over the decades that that if you could design a way of life that is most damaging to human well-being, it would be what we've come up with in the US. You know, I mean, and it's like, it seems sometimes that, well, nobody's paying attention to that, you know, that, well, oh, well, that sounds like fun, or I'll do that, you know, like, oh, well, we're going to go out and have a party. Well, what does that mean? Oh, we're going to smoke cigarettes, we're going to drink alcohol, we're going to make ourselves feel horrible, and our bodies are going to be wrecked, and that's fun. I mean, come on. You know, what kind of mentality is it that, and you know, my conclusion was, well, this is a suicidal culture. And, you know, the statistics support that, because we have a rising incidence of suicide, but that's just the blatant suicide. There's these more subtle forms of suicide that everyone's busy doing all the time that don't get counted as suicide and just end up as different chronic diseases and malfunctioning and whatever. So, you know, these are all things that the mitochondria respond to. And so we think, well, geez, you know, I don't have any energy. But we don't say, well, I better stop doing all these things. We say, well, can I have another cup of coffee? Or I'll take a drug to, you know, to get me going. And, you know, the mitochondria are like, that ain't it. You know, I mean, so I think this is really a bringing to a scientific proof the necessity of our taking better care of ourselves. How about that? I mean, what an old-fashioned idea. But, you know, it's still the heart of the matter. Can we stop the abuse? You know, and Kali Rising, I talk about, you know, the relationship between him and her, the masculine and feminine, the Shiva and Shakti, in each of us. And in one And the first step in looking at that is actually inside of us. What do we do to our bodies and minds, but what do we do to ourselves that is violent and destructive and damaging? And so in that situation, on that level, our mentality is becoming the abusive masculine, and our bodies and our psyches are suffering the trauma of that all the time. And that's not a man and a woman, that's within each of us. So that's where, you know, the mitochondria are responding to that feminine side of ourselves, part of it. The source of spanda is responding to that trauma, that damage, that abuse. And so, you know, we have to stop that. We have to stop abusing ourselves. And you know, you don't have to have an act of Congress to do that. You don't have to have disarmament to do that on a national scale. You just have to have disarmament within yourself to do that. And so, I mean, that's what will allow them to shift gears. There's nothing that we can do to override that, you know. So it brings it back to taking care of yourself. I mean, my teacher, Swami Rama, used to always say, take care, you need to take care of yourself. And people think, well, they thought, well, that I should have a vacation, or what is he talking about? You know, but I mean, there's a long list of ways that we are doing the opposite, that we have simply normalized in our society. So it's like, well, everybody does that. Therefore, it's not damaging. But the mitochondria don't see it that way. They feel that they respond in a very fundamental, that's the essence of life way. You know, this is the essence of life. It responds that way. And we can't, we think we can bypass that or change that and do it another way and don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. But there's no substitute for, you know, detoxing, get the toxic stuff out of your body. Don't put so much toxic stuff into your body. How about that? I mean, I often talk about, I had an apartment when I was a resident in New Orleans in psychiatry, and it had a spiral stairway up this really old building in the French Quarter. And it was really hard to bring the garbage down because the steps were awkward, and you know, I thought, well, what can I do about that? And then I thought, well, oh, I can quit bringing so much garbage stuff in, and then I don't have to carry it out. You know, so that seemed like a brilliant insight, but actually it was just common sense. But yeah, so if we quit putting stuff in, we don't have to go through all the detox to get it out. But you know, that's easier said than done, depending on where we live. We're surrounded by toxic stuff. So we have to be spending quite a bit of time getting rid of it. That's how it has to happen. And it's not just, it is heavy metals and EMFs and glyphosate and, you know, all the long laundry list of chemicals that we have saturated our environment with. But it's also what we put into our heads. You know, what do we bring in? You know, watch. They call them action movies, but it's violence. You know, and we watch that, and that comes into our psyche, and that has a traumatic effect. And so, you know, we don't, like, okay, you don't get enough trauma out in the world. I think it's pretty traumatic. You want to go pay to sit in a movie and get traumatized more, And I don't understand. People love horror movies. Why? Because they terrify you. What? I mean, we're trying to get away from fear. So anyway, there are all these things we put in, psychologically, physically, environmentally, whatever, that we could stop putting in. And then we notice that the mitochondria perk up and say, okay, yeah, this is time to create more energy and vitality, and we feel better. I mean, most of us have had that experience of, like, oh yeah, I stopped doing this, I stopped doing that, I'm eating better, and gosh, I started feeling really good, like, I have energy and curiosity and excitement about being alive, and that's our birthright, and we should be able to be that way all the time. It takes a little discernment to notice where we're actually being violent to ourselves. But there are a lot of different ways that we're doing it. And we don't have to. I mean, we can opt out to a great extent. And then the things that we take in that are just part of the environment, we can clean them out. I mean, Swami Rama looked at us one time and said, when are you people going to learn to clean yourselves? And everybody said, I take a shower every day. What's he talking about? And he meant clean your body inside out, clean out this toxic stuff inside yourself. And this is an elephant in the room. And then, we have a room full of elephants, and that, no doubt about that. But this is one of the biggest elephants in the room, is the fact that we're producing a ton of chemicals for each person each year in this country. And that's, like, if you're sitting on your pile, like, this is my pile. And it's growing because they didn't take away last year's ton before they brought this year's ton. So there you are, sitting on this mountain of chemicals that are just for you, that you're inhaling and eating and drinking and breathing, and you're not cleaning them out. So this is not going anywhere good. And this is what we're talking about. So people say, well, I have no energy. I have chronic fatigue. Well, this is what's going on. And now we have some better understanding of what that means. Before people said, oh, well, you have all these different names for it, chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, or what, most of these syndromes are actually the shutting down of the mitochondria by these various toxic and traumatic influences in our lives. And now that we understand that better, we are better situated to do something about it. So that was sort of a rant, but yeah. But I think it's both exciting and tremendously important, because it's one of the challenges for people that want to study Tantra, is having the vitality to be able to do that, the physical energy and alertness and awareness, and joie de vivre, the feeling of yes, I want to do things and understand things, and we're trying to push back the limitations on our consciousness, in studying Tantra. We're trying to reconnect with the power of the mythical structure of consciousness, the stories, the narratives that we're enmeshed in and both suffering from and are guiding how we live and think. And the magic structure of consciousness, which is the connection with nature and the oneness with all life, and the access to that which seems impossible, that, quote, science, and it's not science, really, it's scientism. Scientism says, no, that's nonsense. But when the data comes in, and you got, what do you do with it? You just denounce it and say, oh no, that can't be true. Why can't that be true? Because it violates the laws of nature. Well, there are no laws of nature for us. There are hypotheses about how nature works, but our hypotheses are still very small compared to the enormity of the complexity of nature. So when new data comes in, we have to look at, reformulate our hypotheses and our working ideas about the, quote, laws of nature, unquote. So the magic is happening all the time. It never stopped. And we don't see it. We work really hard not to see it. So to have the awareness to see the magic and accept that it exists and that we have the power to use that magic can only happen if we are really in good health and have a clarity of mind. And that's why we need to take care of ourselves so that we can be alert and have that curiosity and understanding that leads us to our true potential as human beings, which has shrunk, because it's just like, no, we just believe this, and that's not possible, that's not possible, that's not possible. And so we become more and more impoverished in our lives and in the fulfillment of our life and the enjoyment of our life. So, you know, every little step of learning how all this works and what we need to do to address it is to be celebrated and used. So our knowledge and understanding of the mitochondria can lead us to new effectiveness in terms of how we take care of ourselves and the results of that, so that we can really be fully alive. And it's a good thing to be really full. I mean, if you're going to be here on the planet, you know, then do what you can do, you know, what human beings are capable of doing. And if you don't want to do that, well, you know, you might as well leave, go do what you want to do. But we're here, we're on planet Earth, and we have this wonderful opportunity to be really vital living things, sentient beings, and not just in a rut with habits and fears that we can't break out of our cage because we feel so depleted. And I think the word that fits sometimes, demoralized, like we feel that, well, life is kind of bleak. Yeah, and life that has been bereft of the magic and the mythical and the enchantment of living beings and the forests and all that. We have just little plastic versions in Disney movies, you know. That's how we can get just a slight taste of it, but it's not the real thing. It's kind of like the synthetic thing. So, and then we say afterwards, oh, well, that's all just childish imagination, because the world isn't really like that. The world is really bleak and tough and hard, and so, you know, of course we're depressed and exhausted, and you know, that's the only way it can be, but that's not true. So, yeah. Yes.
How do you work with grief?
Well, I like to tell the story of my my life in suburban Chicago. I was living in a suburb called Glenview, yeah, Glenview, Illinois. It was a far northwestern suburb of Chicago. And back in the 1800s or early 1800s, a community moved there because it was way out in the country. And it was a community of Swedenborgians. Anybody ever heard of Swedenborgians? Anyway, oh yeah, good. And so they had used, in fact, a number of the great homeopaths in the 1800s were Swedenborgians. Because Swedenborg was this amazing man who was from Sweden. He was of nobility, and he was a spiritual seeker, and he had the means to be able to just meditate and study, and he mastered every field like metallurgy, mathematics, philosophy, and then he moved into spirituality. And he went deeper and deeper, and he found the breath was interfering, so he designed his own pranayama system. And he began to be able to predict what was going to happen. And, he was kind of a phenomenon. And so people became quite enamored of what he had to say and his writings and his teachings. And so they formed a kind of church, but it wasn't the usual church. So the community of Swedenborgians were still there and still lived together in Glenview. And since their homeopath had died and I was a homeopathic physician, they kind of adopted me and I became their physician. So I went to have dinner with them and got to know some of them. And the grandmother in one of the families that I became close to died. So I went to the funeral. And I came in and there was a family, and I went up to someone and I said, "I'm so sorry about your grandmother." And they said, "You are?" And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Why?" And I said, so I was stuttering. They said, "She had a beautiful passing and we're here to celebrate." And I went, "Oh, okay." I mean, that was their vision, their understanding, their concept of life was that we're here and we accomplish certain things and we go through certain things and we learn certain things. And then we move on to another sphere where there are different challenges. And that she passed so easily and gracefully and is now, doing the next thing, they were happy and celebrating. And so I don't think we can ever work very well with grief until we can grasp those things, until we can see life differently and death differently. And so that's what I suggest in terms of how to deal with grief, is that we ask ourselves, why am I sad about this? I mean, yes, this person's dear to me, but our children are dear to us and they move across the country and get a better job and we're happy for them. We don't say, "Oh, I'm grieving because my kids left." I mean, maybe we do, maybe some people do. But I think it calls in each of us for a different perception, a different awareness, a different acceptance, a different, are we grieving for them? If so, I think that's misplaced. Then we're grieving for ourselves. Well, we have to love them and let them go. I mean, Swami Rama said, love is non-attachment. We somehow have gotten the idea that love is attachment. So I want to hold on to you. You know, I love you, I want to hold on to you. Well, wait a minute, is that really love? Or is that selfish, this is what I want for me? So I think these thoughts come up when we lose someone in the family. And this is an opportunity to reconfigure how we think about that and to open our hearts and say, oh my God, you know, my mother died about 6 years ago, 8 years ago, something like that. And when I found out, I immediately went and sat down and, you know, kind of tried to connect with her. And what I experienced was a sense of her going like that. And it was just exhilarating. And I thought, okay, she's gone for it, you know, and so I couldn't feel grief. I only felt like, yeah, she did it. She's gone. I can only imagine what she's doing, but I don't know exactly. But it seemed exciting, and so, you know, every person has their own process around this, and it's an opportunity. It's a major part of living is how do we deal with dying, you know, and because each of us are probably going to do that unless they change the rules entirely, and so, you know, it's as we get older, we begin to understand, you know, that, well, yeah, there's this is just one platform and one stage, and then we're going to go do this other whatever it turns out to be, and then who knows where we go from there, and that we open our hearts to those that we love. I mean, a lot of times people suffer in their death because the family wants to hold on, you know, don't leave me, and they go, oh my God. I know my mother, before she died, her granddaughter came and said, she was saying, they said she had Alzheimer's at the end, but I don't think it was that, because she said, well, I got to get packed, I'm going. And so somebody said, well, where are you going? And she said, Blackville. And that's where she grew up. And they said, oh, well, you know, you can't go there. I mean, you don't know anyone there anymore. And she said, I mean, where I'm going is by way of Blackville. Oh, and so anyway, she says, you know, I do have to go. And her granddaughter grabbed her hand and said, but I don't want you to leave me. And she said, I know you don't, but I'm going to have to go now. And so this is our great challenge, one of our great challenges, because we have the fear of death, and we impose that on the whole process of death. Like, well, I'm afraid of it, therefore it's something horrible, you know. So therefore, someone who's dying is tragedy. Well, how is it a tragedy? You have a wonderful life and you've done so many good things, and then you're finished, and then you go, you know, you graduate, you know. And so I think that's how I suggest working with grief, is to look at those issues and look at yourself and look at your heart and look at your capacity for celebrating this person's life, and letting them, you know, sending them off with your blessings and love, and not holding on, not being attached.
Thank you for all that. I'm seeing more of a readjustment to not being a caregiver for a year.
Yeah.
So my mom died a few weeks ago, and she freed herself and she freed me at the same time. And then this week I just realized, no, I don't want to go back to this job I hate, and now I don't have to.
Right.
So
And it is freeing. It is freeing because we behave a certain way around our parents, and then that has to be dissolved, and let us move on and let them move on. And that's how growth happens. That's how evolution happens. And it's a beautiful thing. And so we sort of we don't have to accept it, but if we accept it and see the beauty in it, it's much easier and better for everybody. Yeah.
Thank you.
What about the grief for the suffering in a life that's not necessarily well lived, a life, of a grief for the suffering that's going on during a life,
Well, how do you say that it's not well lived? We don't know what each person came here to do and what is their path. And for some people, going that path through that suffering, those traumas, those struggles is their growth, and it may have been a huge success. So, we can't judge that.
that's part of the attachment, I guess, or something. I don't know.
Yeah. So yes, thank you for these wonderful questions and thoughts, and these are good things to explore. Very important, very important.
I'm going to take just follow up on that, because Michael Newton's books, there is a real sense of whether or not a life is well lived or not. And I suppose we don't have full access to that information, but there's certainly the element that cruelty it does not correspond to a life well lived. And while there can be soul contracts to, someone leads a harsh life by prior agreement, he does talk about damaged souls from people who repeatedly misstepped.
Well, another story I have about that. Some of you have heard these stories, but I was doing a workshop with Carolyn Mace. Does anybody know who she is? Carolyn Mace. Yeah, and she was talking about similar topics, and she grabbed this guy's arm. She said, "Okay, stand here beside me." And he got up and stood beside her, and she said, "Now, there's your son. There's this person who's going to be your son. Do you love him enough to go into to be his abusive father in his next life, so that he can grow and learn the things he needs to learn?" And everybody's smoke came out of people's ears, and like, whoa. And so, yeah, we don't know those things, an abusive life, what was the plan, what do you learn, what comes of it. These are mysteries that at some point, probably after we leave, we'll have a better understanding of it. But in the meantime, I think it behooves us to extend our heart to everybody and say, wow, you chose a hard path, or you chose a path that I don't understand, or whatever. But God bless you, and who knows what's happening here? We don't know. Yes. Tom.
Just unmuting, sorry. Hi, Swami. All right.
Hi.
Yeah, just a question on what I heard you say earlier about self-disarmament or internal disarmament.
Hmm.
How does one go about that process? Because that's one of my biggest struggles is, you know, not that internal battle, how to not fight that internal battle.
Yeah, yeah. Well, certainly it's a challenge, yes. But the first step is to be aware of it. And that's a huge step. And that in itself, we think we have to do something. But sometimes just becoming aware of what's happening changes everything. And it is, it's quite understandable that we conduct our inner life in that military fashion, because that's the message that our society, it's the fight against cancer, it's the fight against this, everything's a fight. Life is a struggle. You should be out there fighting hard. So that permeates our whole way of seeing the world and seeing ourselves, and the inner world that we carry around with us is permeated by that. So just seeing it is a huge first step. Like most people, I don't think most people realize that the US has almost 1,000 military bases in something like 600 countries around the world. And that we're spending around 60% of our budget as a country on military matters. That just on the face of it, that sounds totally absurd. For that to change, all of us have to become aware that we're doing that and look around and say, look, our infrastructure that Biden is talking about is collapsing because we're spending all our money on weapons and killing people and wars all over the world. But, we manage not to know about it, so it can't change. So just knowing about it makes change begin to happen. And I congratulate you on being aware of it, because that's not easy. It seems so normal, that mostly we just say, well, of course, I'm fine. But, you have looked inside and seen that. Well, that was a huge step. And to see it in more detail and observe it, and it begins to lose its power. It loses its hold on us. So yeah, just keep, study the details of how it's being done and notice and be aware, and things will shift.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great question. I know we started late, so I understand if people have to leave, but we still can have another 5 or 10 minutes if you wish. Or does everyone feel complete?
I'd ask another question if no one's going to go.
Sure.
Can you speak to the sort of saying that I've heard that all disease begins in the mind?
Yeah, I'm not sure I totally believe that, even though I'm a psychiatrist and a holistic physician. I think that I would certainly make an exception for the toxic environmental things that many people don't know about. you know, I mean, they didn't elect to be subject to those. And they didn't, there was not a choice. Now, if they become aware, they can make a choice. But the way that information is controlled in our society, people spend a lot of money making sure that you aren't aware, you know, and therefore you don't have choice, and you don't know that that's what's happening. So I wouldn't say that the illnesses that result from that are coming from the mind, but I would say that a lot of the others are. So yeah, I mean, you know, the mind, the mitochondrial psychobiology is about how things that are happening in our inner world are affecting our health. And so I wouldn't necessarily say every illness begins in the mind. I would say the mind is critical because it can become aware, and then that can change, or the mind can create a new story and that can change. The mind can expand and reconnect with the magic structure, with nature, with our oneness, and things will change. But it's not necessarily where it started, unless you say, well, you elected before you were born to come into this situation, and therefore you've subjected yourself to these toxic environments and so forth. And you know, yes, maybe that and that level, if you want to go beyond this lifetime, you might be able to say that. So yeah, it's a complex statement, you know.
Yeah, I was thinking in a sort of relationship into like the subtle energies and pranayama and the breath and how that affects the mind, and then how it contorts itself into all kinds of different dis-ease.
Right. And again, you know, the heart of that is that the prana, the flow of prana, pranayama, and so forth, that most people aren't even aware that how they breathe makes a difference, and don't have the understanding or the training to be able to work with that. So, you know, and I don't think that means they're victims. I just think it means we all need to be more curious and, you know, and study what's happening inside of us and take advantage of the learning that's around us and so forth. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you all for finding your way here, and that was a delightful discussion, and I'm glad you all were here for it. And I will turn things back over to Daryl. But have you noticed that we didn't have any trouble with our internet? We have new internet service, and now we're ready. So.
Yeah, watch out. We will, on that note, we will not be offering a session next Sunday. We'll be away. So stay tuned for 2 weeks. The date would be the 25th, I think it is, April 25th. And we'll do a meditation that night. So thank you so much for joining tonight, and you can unmute and say goodnight to everybody.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Swami Ravi.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Bye, everybody. Good to see you all.
Good night,
too.
all.
Thanks.
Thank you, Arabella, for hosting.
Thanks, Arabella.
Recording.
Yes, thank
Thanks,
you.
Arabella.
Thank you, Dave.